Hi, I'm Nan Simonson. I'm the author of Aging Powerfully. Powerfully is an acronym for 10 lifestyle modalities that can help us live well, live longer, live vibrant lives with health, balance, and joy. I'm a health coach with a lifestyle medical practice, and the word powerfully is an acronym for 10 things that research has shown can make a difference in extending our life and our health. Today, I'm talking about the surprising health benefits of mindful meditation and of mindfulness. I recently heard a podcast between Dr. Andrew Huberman, a neurobiologist at Stanford University, where he's a professor as well as runs a lab, and Elissa Epel, Elissa Epel. I'm going to include the link here of that conversation, and Epel is Epel. They spoke for 2 hours. I took copious notes because I wanted to share the basic concepts, and so I'll just be reading my notes. And I hope that you get something out of it. I got so much out of it. I listened to it 3 times. They are citing, especially Dr. Epel, the results of research that not only clarified, but also proved that physiologically we can change our mind and our body by mindful meditation, and that doesn't mean going into transcendental meditation. That doesn't mean going off and becoming an expert at it. That means some simple tools that I'll talk about here. So I'm going to get right into it. Dr. Epel's work for decades has involved highlighting ways to break the cycles of bodily abuse, like overeating and addictive behaviors, using mindfulness and meditation. This kind of training affects our body and teaches us to slow down and pay attention to what's going on inside. Those who do those who do the best are those who have learned to reach in and affect their body with awareness, to slow down and really pay attention. These are skills we can learn. This kind of work can change our entire receptive environment. That means how we take things in. And in Dr. Epel's research, they found that skills were crucial to help people with their stress reaction of mindless eating and other compulsive behavior. These skills include mindfulness, mindful meditation, mindful eating, and using these tools to override habitual behavior and what almost becomes an automatic response. Most of all, based on the way our lower brain, our limbic system, tends to accept and actually want to repeat patterns, whether they're helpful or not. And we can be habitually behaving out of, in an unconscious way, believing that we have to respond when we're directed by our thoughts to behave in a certain way, deal with stress in a certain way that's negative and damaging to us. And you'll hear today other ways to ameliorate that. Both Dr. Huberman and Dr. Epel are in alignment with their declaration that to interrupt the stress responses, and that's what we're looking at here, because stress involves so much of our body's behavioral responses. If we can break cycles of stress, and we have ways of doing that, we can break habitual behavior much more easily than we would in any other way. To interrupt that, behavior should come first, not pharmaceuticals or procedures or processes. Behaviors, what we do, what we can control through our own body. Also, these behaviors come with zero cost. The time invested is at your own discretion, and you can use short intervals throughout the day to make a difference. It's stunning to think that with something as benign as walking meditation, we can break the bonds of habitual bad habits, break them often enough, and we can become free of them. And as I did with my eating disorder that lasted over 50 years, that no longer pulls me anymore, techniques can make the difference. And they can be things that feel, again, so benign that we don't understand the power that we have. And I think some of today's what I'm sharing with you is going to make that much more clear. Dr. Epel described a study that she conducted of pregnant women testing metabolic changes brought about by stress reduction and meditation and similar practices. The mindfulness training was only a 2-month training, and yet they found metabolic changes, improved glucose tolerance during pregnancy, were dramatic, and that stress mediation in the pregnant women affected them downstream. Babies during their first year with those women who were in that program, the first year of life, had fewer illnesses, less obesity than those in the control group who did not have this training. Health and even mental health of the moms, as well as the children, 10 years later, was measured by Dr. Epel's lab and was significant. All of this was based on the mindfulness training they got in that 2-month period of time during pregnancy. What was their stress response training? In general, these women met once a week. They also got reminder cards that they could post around the house to remind them about their mindful practices and to do mindfulness check-ins. They were reminded to do the check-ins on their body throughout the day and then off and on throughout the week. This meant simply, so what was the actual activity? This meant simply closing their eyes, mindfully breathing, checking in with their body to see what their response was, what their feelings were in the body, what they were holding on to, were their shoulders held tight, was their stomach in knots, checking in with their body and breathing into whatever it was, or doing their meditative let's say walking, whatever it took to ameliorate that, to alleviate any body tension that they were holding, and quite often unconsciously. They were also guided to do body movement like yoga, tai chi, qigong, breathing exercises, again, even slow walking, to let them feel their body. So reminder cards reminded them to breathe, to check in, and to move their body. And these reminder cards were not only pinged on texts, but also put up around the house. Breathe, check in, move your body. And then additional movement was encouraged as well. This also included check-ins several times a day in this same way. Catch up with where I am. And she calls it, what it helps prevent is ruminating thoughts, things that it's almost like a hamster wheel of thoughts, where you get something, where we get something in our mind that we ruminate on, that spins us around and around, and we can't find a way to break that. This simple technique, sitting quietly, breathing, checking in with our body, and then moving our body to put the emphasis on our external ability to control the internal atmosphere, primarily the way our thoughts are going. She calls those sticky thoughts, those things that hold us almost hostage with a narrative in our mind that usually will come about because of stressful situations, but also become quite habitual, as I mentioned earlier, due to our autonomic nervous system, due to our limbic brain. Okay, breathing is one of the most important ways of affecting the internal environment from the mind to the body. The movement helps redirect what's happening in our mind and process it effectively and healthfully through the body. Also, any mind-body activity can help break the mind-body link of thought to stressor. Additional studies that Dr. Epel cited showed that, for example, overweight people doing the same protocol, checking in with the body, mindfulness, including the mindful walking, mindful eating, regular breath work. You're going to hear this repeated, can get on top of their emotions enough to interfere with their urges to binge and to become more selective about what they eat. The body scan significantly reduced cravings when this was tested. Just focusing on the body to help to release stress, making healthy decisions easier, was shown again and again to be the result of what we call interoception, which means looking inside and measuring what's going on in there in our mind as well as our body. Taking our mind off ourselves, off of our negative thoughts, off of critical thoughts of ourselves and our environment and what's going on with our world, checking in with our body in a positive way helps bring about ease and well-being. Studies have shown a tamping down of negative gene expression. So in other words, even our physiology down to our genetic coding can be overridden when we do practices of mindfulness and meditation. Even greater amounts of telomerase. Telomerase is the enzyme that is used in the building of telomeres. And telomeres are a sign, a symbol of health and long aging. They're on the ends of our chromosomes and they're protective of the chromosomes. Those who regularly de-stress with meditation and doing short bouts throughout the day of checking in has the most profound effect on our stress response. Getting out in nature is also profoundly helpful. These help rewire the brain. So what we're doing, and this is a interesting aside here, it almost seems impossible that something as mild as taking time to do meditation, even if it's 5 minutes of paying attention to our own breath, to take a walk and mindfully walk rather than ruminate, create stories in our mind, respond to mentally, emotionally to what's going on in our world, to be owned by, again, narratives, is very different than walking meditatively, being in the here and now. It seems that something that benign can't possibly have power. And yet, this is the point of 2 neurologists running their own labs at top universities, finding that beyond medication, beyond processes and procedures, something as easy and as controllable as what we're talking about, and I'll talk more about it, can have a measurable in terms of laboratory verification, a measurable difference in not only how we feel, but also things like our telomeres, our telomerase, our heartbeat, our prevention of Alzheimer's, things that can actually affect longevity. And yet these are very mild processes that we are being directed to do. So I'll get back to that. Studies have shown that mitochondrial health, and mitochondria are the energy factories in our cells, thus energy production, can be a measure of how positive we feel regardless of what's going on around us. Our mood on any given day affects our current mitochondrial level, which again affects energy. Radical acceptance, and this is this phrase, radical acceptance, is something else that they worked with in terms of measurable results. It's a term that's used as it relates to situations we cannot change, non-negotiable stressors. And we've been through that. We've been through 3 years of non-negotiable stressors from the outside hitting us and affecting the way we live our lives. And I'm referring to our experience with COVID and the restrictions put upon us and the changes in well, for some of us, devastating changes in terms of illness of family members and those around us. I'm going to read that sentence again, though. Radical acceptance is a term that's used as it relates to situations that we cannot change, non-negotiable stressors, but that we either fight or we find a way to accept. We can learn tools to do this. One tool is envisioning, and I love this, envisioning a rope that's tied to a brick wall, that brick wall representing an immutable situation, visualizing ourselves pulling and pulling on that rope, shaping our hands, stressing our arms, frustrating us, bringing about stress, but not affecting any change. The more we try to change an immutable situation, the stronger the stress. And with enough work, we can learn to simply let go of the rope. With awareness, we realize that this is how things are, that this is reality. We learn to drop the rope and free our hands to do what we can. Actually, this is how I got through the death of my first husband. I was married 40 years. He contracted esophageal cancer. It was traced back to Vietnam and his being doused a couple of times with Agent Orange. And we knew he was terminal. We accepted it. He had gone through 4 months of chemo radiation. It, instead of stopping the growth, it actually then spread through his lungs and his liver. And he was told at the appointment, we thought we were going to have to set a surgery for what they call resection. We thought he'd be fine after all of the chemo and radiation. He was told, I'm sorry, it's everywhere now. There's nothing we can do. And we can experiment. We could do trial things. And he said, no, I'm done. We set up hospice. It was Thanksgiving. It was the day after Thanksgiving, a Friday, set up hospice on Monday. And for the next 7 months, when we knew, it's been, 13 years now? It's hard to talk about. We knew he was dying, and we knew every month was going to be the last of that month of any year ever. And yet we accepted that fact that there was nothing we could do about it. And we went about making, and this sounds so strange, making that 7 months so valuable. He was on hospice, so his pain, which was immense, was lessened dramatically with the drugs. But we went out to lunch every day. We found places that would blend him food because he couldn't swallow and things had to drip down. But we would sit at a restaurant and play cards. We did something really strange, which was we read obituaries because everybody else had sad stories and young men who died and left children, young children. And we could say to ourselves, that could have been us. We're lucky that that wasn't us. We knew that, we knew what was going to happen, and we lived every single day well. And it could maybe not have been that way. We could have been fighting the entire time, and it could have been a fight to the death, which would have been a very different story during those 7 months. So we let go of the rope. We let it go. And we lived as well as we could. I would push him in his wheelchair for coffee every morning at a 7-Eleven 1.5 miles away. So I was getting my exercise, and he was out and we were together. It was actually, in a way, a beautiful time. So with awareness, we realize that this is how things are, that this is reality. We drop the rope, free our hands to do what we can. And this is, as I said, how I got through my own situation. And my guess is many or several of you listening to this know exactly what I'm talking about if and when you were able to do that with a situation that could have taken you down emotionally and made you ill. Our physical practice that is simple yet meaningful is to learn literally physically how to lean back and let life happen. We fight when we can. When there's something to fight for, we're tenacious. But by the same token, we also accept what we cannot change the things we can, and pray that we are wise enough to know the difference. That's the serenity prayer. An important takeaway here is that our mindset shapes our physiology. Action in our body then affects our mind. Journaling is another thing we can do. Our purpose gives us a reason to even try things that will make our everyday life easier. And journaling, to be clear on what it is we're looking at, what it is we're looking for, and how it is we're taking care of our bodies on a daily basis, can be a way of putting this down and helping us set a pattern, and again, neuro adapt and rewire our brain. Our toxic food environment, and then they got into this. Our toxic food environment, because this is another thing she studies, and that is eating disorders of high sugar, fat, salt, especially in processed foods, leads people to eat impulsively and compulsively and makes it hard to stop. Most people, not all, some people eat less, but most people eat in times of stress. The pharmaceutical companies would like to tell you that they have the answer. As a matter of fact, there are a number of new drugs out there that are supposed to be for people who are, for example, binge eaters, because it's supposed to help tamp that down. And nobody is talking about the food. And I'll get to that. Would like to tell you that they have the answer, but it will never solve the problem that we solve using our body to control our mind and the interplay of our mind and our body. Even in mouse studies, if we stress them and give them Oreos, they will develop binge eating and become very round in the midsection, that dangerous abdominal fat. In other words, the metabolic health syndrome, which is plaguing our Western societies, that belly fat is what they're referring to, that happens even in mice. Now, they're not eating because of an emotional stress. They're eating because they're given foods that they can't stop eating, and they'll eat until obesity. We're wired to store fat that way around the midsection because in times of stress, the body can easily get to that fat. And that's the kind needed under stress to fight the woolly mammoth. But we're not living in that kind of time anymore. We are, if we allow it, if we don't have these tools we're talking about, which we'll get more clear on in just a bit, the use of, in our society, there are stressors that are affecting us on a daily basis, and they are from the outside in, but can be changed from the inside out in terms of how we live with them. Again, mindfulness, meditation, and more. So the answer is, how can we intervene? How could we block the compulsive eating based on what has become a pervasive lifestyle, meaning a lifestyle where, 60 to 70% of the foods of the American public are processed foods purposely designed by industry to, well, I'm going to say make us fat and sick and die younger, but that's not what they're doing. They're just trying to make profits. They're making foods that they've tested to find that we will eat to the degree that we'll eat more than we would ever want. That's what they're doing. Our innate opioid system comes into play here. Our opioid system lights up with calorically dense food, high in fat, salt, and sugar, especially sugar. The more overweight a person becomes, the quicker our opioid system lights up under stress from addictive foods. Those that are designed to be highly palatable typically again with high fat, sugar and salt, even without a psychological base, will overeat and binging can set in because they can't stop eating the foods. This is a tendency toward and there is a tendency toward greater reward dependency, and that's part of the opioid system. That's part of the dopamine system, which is part of the opioid system, and that is dopamine will light up when we get what we want, but it also lights up to drive us to want more, but it also takes more for the dopamine to then fire in the more that we acclimate to whatever it is that we're eating, and it's a vicious cycle. Attention's been paid, therefore, to manage this by managing cravings. Urges or cravings was how I learned, or managing cravings was part of how I learned to manage what many of you know if you've read Aging Powerfully and if you've heard me talk. Was a eating disorder, bulimia, for more than 50 years. When I was told by many that I wouldn't be able to stop, when I was medicated with everything they could think of to try to help me stop the binging and then the purging, nothing helped until I found a way to override urges. And this is what this is talking about. I'll read it again. Attention's been paid, therefore, to manage this by managing cravings or by managing urges. I'll get to that in a minute. Although the pharmaceutical industry would like us to medicate the opioid system and bypass the brain signals with pharmaceuticals, the only way to override them is to acknowledge the power of foods in our toxic food environment and the power that those foods have over our mind and therefore over our body, and especially times of stress, which is as pervasive as those foods. The pharmaceutical companies are saying that everyone with a certain BMI should be on if you have a certain cholesterol level, you should be on statins, instead of being told how to eat to bring down that cholesterol level. Now pharmaceuticals are saying with certain new drugs that everyone over a certain BMI should be on these new drugs, and Dr. Epel is yelling that this is total rubbish, that it will never be the answer. So there's two things I've experienced here: learning to drop the rope when something I couldn't control had me in such a tragic way, and that was the loss of my husband, knowing that he was going, which he did, and overcoming a 55-year eating disorder by doing exactly what she's talking about, learning to override urges. How? Because I stopped eating the junk. How? Because I went whole food plant-based. The vegan part isn't as important to this point because I am vegan, whole food plant-based, completely plant-based. But the whole food part was not eating processed oils, not eating sugars, not eating fats, not eating salts that were put together to turn us all into, I'll call it junkies, junk food junkies. It was made that way on purpose. I'll keep going. So let's look at alternatives. Let's look at alternatives. Sugars and hidden sugars, as Dr. Lustig, who is also in UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, in other words, a physician who works with Dr. Epel in these concepts, says that sugar is playing a damaging role here more than any other element, acknowledges that the problem is in our sugars, in the processed foods, and that the drugs won't even touch that. And is emphasizing that we'll override any drug with diet, making dietary decisions, but also learning how to dampen down urges using mindfulness, change in food, lowering of stress using mindfulness. And as they acknowledge the force of big pharma and big food has put us in a position of almost fighting a losing battle without this kind of guidance and this kind of knowledge. Healthcare does not acknowledge and promote any other alternatives. Our desire to overeat or to binge is one of the strongest pathways because it goes back ancestrally to survival. Dr. Epel teaches people to separate emotions from hunger, and this is part of mindfulness, to become aware of the difference. This is done through mindfulness, meditation, and our involvement with mitigating stress responses by movement, paying attention, mindfulness, breathing, and again, we'll talk about that. While working with patients to increase bodily awareness, they're told to ask themselves when it's time to eat, for example, am I really hungry? Then labeling the hunger from 1 to 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, how hungry am I? Asking themselves what else could they do, could be done instead of eating. Again, this is part of that simple but benign word, mindfulness, being aware. She calls this a top-down mindful check-in. Checking in with ourselves, breathing, movement. This was one of my favorite because it was what I was taught to do in Brain Over Binge. The change of diet helped me recover from my eating disorder, but a book, Brain Over Binge by Katherine Hansen, helped me because she taught, and she was taught this by a Jack Trimpey, who did it with drug and alcohol addiction. She thought, well, gosh, in his book, he did it with drugs and alcohol addiction, and they overcame it by learning to overcome urges. I'll do the same thing with food because she was also had an eating disorder and bulimia. Well, actually, it wasn't purging, it was binge and overexercise. And she was able to overcome I think it was 7 to 10 year addiction within weeks by understanding these concepts. And that was that we can, it's the knowledge and then the understanding and then the playing out of overcoming urges. And any of you in any, I'll say, setting where there are things, there's anything that you do that is not good for you, but you can't seem to stop doing it. This applies there. We have those limbic brain, that lower brain that will protect us from discomfort, keeps our heart beating, keeps our lungs expanding, but it also wants to keep us in equanimity, comfort. If we're used to doing a thing like binging, like gambling, like overspending, it will keep us doing that with urges. Oh, you feel that way, just go do it. It'll make you feel better. And it does for moments. And then, of course, the destruction comes in, and that's the aftermath of whatever we've done. The whole idea of understanding that you can overcome urges by mindfully paying attention and moving beyond it. You look at the check-in, do I really need to do this? No, I don't. I'm going to ignore it. Now, that sounds too simplistic, but that's exactly what happens after, again, 5 decades of being owned by urges. I learned that I could simply ignore them. Look at them. I've got this urge. I want it so badly. I've done it again and again. It'll feel really good, but do I really want it? No, I don't. Well, yes, I do. But is this the way I want an outcome to be? Because the outcome comes within minutes afterwards. No. And then mindfully going on in other ways until the urge passes. And the more it passes, the more it is lessened. The more it is lessened, the sooner eventually it just goes away. It's been almost 5 years. And what a difference in life when you're not owned by something that owns you. Okay. Temptation is a stressor. Dr. Epel stresses that controlling our environment is essential. If you know who Chef AJ is, those of you who are whole food plant-based would know Chef AJ. She's really in our space. She says all the time, if it's in your house, some of you are repeating this with me, it's in your mouth. Meaning, set your environment up where you're not constantly having to fight an urge. I don't have anything here that I don't want to eat. It makes it easier not to have to fall into a requirement of mindfulness, walking meditation, deep breathing, because I'm so stressed by looking at a bag of something that I used to love, but that I don't eat anymore, but I know would be good, but I'm not going to do it because I don't want to. You see where the stress is? Your environment plays a big role in it. Temptation is a stressor. She stresses controlling your environment. She says it's essential. There has to be a rock solid resolve and a plan around why we're avoiding what we're avoiding and why, and just keep it away from us and fill our environment with what's good for us. What follows is a great example of controlling environment. Dr. Epel and other colleagues who are appalled by the pervasiveness of the things that are killing patients being in hospitals, for example. And she and other colleagues were able to get sugary sodas because they were in every hospital. They were served to patients during meals. They were able to get sugary sodas taken out of the workplace and the hospital at UCSF Medical Center. One of the results was that the employees lost weight. That was the only difference. There was no training at that point. Then, with some additional direction and support, such as the help with directing their attention toward long-term goals and benefits of breaking free of addictive behavior, they saw very positive results. Now, at least 100 hospitals have stopped selling sodas and sugary drinks. Drinking sugary drinks, by the way, and sodas is one of the worst things that we can do for bodily health because of the effect on our metabolic regulation and the disruption of our microbiome. Not to mention, if someone's even drinking a sugar-free, what aspartame does to the brain. And the chemicals are damaging, as well as the infusion of high caffeine drinks, even for the sugar-free. This drives addictive behavior because of the combination of sugar and caffeine that makes us feel so good, but then the resulting crash that makes us feel so bad, and then the feeling of needing to have more, again, driving us in a vicious cycle. They acknowledge that the food industry has done this on purpose. They know what they're doing. They're doing it for profits. They owe it to their shareholders. So we can leave it at that. Okay. She gave an example of what mindful eating can be. She took a group of people who were also bingers, and in teaching them mindful eating, she gave them all a Twinkie because almost everybody likes sugary things, whether or not Twinkies was one of them. And they mindfully ate a Twinkie. So what is mindful eating? It's putting the food in front of you and looking at it. It's smelling it. It's turning it over and looking at its shape and its density, etc. It's breaking off a tiny piece or taking the whole thing and smelling it. It's smelling it with your mouth open and smelling it with your mouth closed, where you're actually getting different olfactory responses. It's taking a little bite and rolling it around on your tongue and swallowing it. It's taking a bigger bite and mashing it around and seeing what that feels like in your mouth. Just the thought of that with a Twinkie, I think, would coat the tongue like putting lard on it. And she said when they did that, people who were generally heavy eaters and bingers, she saw very few finish the Twinkie. We do that with good, healthy foods. We start understanding the value of eating whole foods. I'll say plant-based because they are so good for us as often as possible. And that's mindful eating. all the way through the stopping when we're full, not when we're stuffed, all the way through paying attention to how we feel afterwards, how it feels when we have that feeling of satiety and comfort from what we ate. I have a patient that I work with that is a type 1 diabetic, and he comes to a group that I do on a regular basis. He's a type 1 diabetic, what they call brittle diabetic, which means that they are rather reactive um, to insulin spikes and drops, and that can be very dangerous. And he's also battling high blood pressure. But he has acknowledged, and he's in his 80s, early 80s, he's acknowledged that with meditation and mindful practice, he's been able to get his challenges in line. He was having huge spikes and falls, dangerous falls in blood sugar. He was having big spikes of high blood pressure. And he's gotten that all taken care of with his mindful practices. This is magic. Are these things hard? Are they dramatic? Are they light changing? Yes. Are they something that's disruptive time wise? No, because you can do these things anytime. And I'm going to talk now about what that looks like. Let's first talk about, we've talked about what eating mindfully is. Let's talk about mindful meditation. What does that mean? It could be, now I'm not going to, I think maybe we'll do some breakouts and have longer periods of the process, but we're not doing that today. One of the easiest ways to do meditation, mindful meditation, is to simply pay attention to your breath. You can sit back, you can sit straight up, you can lay down, you can breathe in, close your eyes because it's less distracting. You can breathe in, even feeling the difference between the cool of the air entering the nostrils and the way it feels when it's leaving your mouth. Feel as the breath fills up your lung down to your belly and how it leaves you from the belly up through the lungs. Paying attention to simply watching, listening to, and feeling your breath. Here's what happens with a lot of people with meditation. It's hard in that we lose track. Try doing 10 to 1, 10 breaths to 1. If you're like I was in the beginning of meditation, I could never get to 10. I don't even know that I could get to 5 before my mind would take me somewhere else. The ruminating, the making stories of things, the plans for other things rather than staying with nothing but the breath. But here's an analogy of why that's not a bad thing and why it shouldn't stress us. Because you know that exercise is good. You know that building your biceps is smart, and it's even smarter to use a weight to do that. When you're building your strength using weight, for example, do we think that we should be frustrated when we're actually putting in those movements? In other words, when I'm pushing against resistance, should I be frustrated by that because that's when it's most hard? And then controlling is a little bit hard, but it's harder to get it up if it's a lot of weight. Well, with meditation, that keeping the mind on the breath and not paying attention to the other thoughts. That not paying attention to the other thoughts is the equivalent of pushing the weights. In other words, it feels hard, but it's the best thing for you. And so those thoughts aren't a bad thing. What we do with the thoughts by thinking, oh, back to the breath. Oh, back to the breath. There goes another thought. Okay. Oh, back to the breath. That part that feels so frustrating that you want to stop is exactly that part that is strengthening you, because what you're doing, and this is the point of all of what I've talked about, that Dr. Epel and Dr. Huberman in 2 hours talked about. So I'm going to recommend you go to their conversation because I have a tiny bit of what they talked about. That's what their conversation highlighted that these simple methods, mindful meditation, mindful eating, these things as simple as what I've just shown you, are so dramatically, physiologically, neurologically valuable that they rewire our system and rewire our brain to make life easier, to make us healthier, and to make us live longer. Simple things that we would think we should have to knock ourselves out to get results for are this simple and well worth doing. Mindful meditation, the breathing, walking meditation. What is that? Going on a walk and doing the same thing. When something comes to the mind, let it go. Remember, that's the part that feels hard. I think I'll quit. No, you don't quit there. You just let it go and know I'm doing my push-up, and eventually I won't have to do it that hard, because eventually those thoughts you can take care of by training your brain to stay focused. Mindful meditation is focusing on what you're seeing around you, what you're seeing with no judgment, no narrative, no story, just looking. What do I see? That's really pretty. I didn't see that red flower. I didn't see the height of the tree. I didn't see how squirrels will go to the other side of a tree when I go by. And no more stories than that, just an observation and keep on going. And it's, what do I hear? What do I smell? It's the observance. This morning, I really felt like I needed some exercise before this. So I got on my bike and I did a 50-minute bike ride in the rain. That was really interesting. I had to take off my glasses because the rain was coming down and I couldn't see. And I thought, oh man, this is going to be a little hard. But no, I could see big things, so I wasn't going to run into anything. And I was seeing, I had to keep reminding myself, don't make narratives out of these things, Nan. I had to stop myself from doing what I'm doing now, planning how I was going to talk about it. I had to stay in the moment, just observe the rain coming, and it was like crystals coming through the air. Observe the fragrance, the smell. That's another part of walking meditation, especially in nature, which is magical. Observe the aroma of wet, basically California native plants, because I was at our river bottom just below the mountain. I usually walk, and then I rode around the lake. It's a couple acre lake that's in the area as well. And I looked at the ducks and paid attention to simply watching them glide, no stories around it, mindful cycling. And I learned a lot. It was magical. I was getting wet and I had to say to myself, I'm really wet. And then I had to just feel that. Was it uncomfortable? No, it was just wet. Dripped down my back. Is that bad? Should I be upset? No, it didn't feel like anything, but it dripped down my back. Just an observation. Really interesting stuff, people. Try it. And then let's talk about breathing, and then we're done. How are we for time? I have no idea. Okay. Dr. Huberman talks a lot about, and was acknowledged by Dr. Epel for this, his physiological sigh. The physiological sigh is what our body does throughout the day, does it at night, to balance our oxygen and carbon dioxide. And it is a kind of a thing. Have you ever caught yourself? You wake up and go, or when you're crying. What's happening is we have alveoli in our lungs. They flatten out and they deoxygenate. And when it fills them up, but when the second time, it mainly through the nose, it inflates them. And now we've got extra oxygen and we let it out. By doing that, we're exchanging, we're bringing down the carbon dioxide, we're breathing that out, we're bringing in the oxygen and balancing it. We get stressed from an overload of carbon dioxide. So that physiological sigh is actually a de-stressor and a calming mechanism. A longer sigh than a breathing in will calm us down. A longer inhale than the breathing out, that's almost Wim Hof breathing will excite us and get our heart pumping, but we want to slow down. So physiological sigh, a 4-7-8 breath. That's Dr. Weil. Breathe in 4, hold for 7, let go for 8. Longer breath out, therefore calming. And the holding it actually allows sort of a meditative moment in there while we're doing that attentive counting to then let the breath out. And that's something you get better and better and better at. Be sure when you breathe in the 4, you're doing as much a breath as you can. In other words, a full quick breath, not a shallow breath, or you don't have enough air to hold it for the 7 and breathe it out for 8. You just won't have enough oxygen. That's a way of doing it. The Navy SEALs, to calm themselves, to focus themselves, will do, or special forces, physical people, will do box breathing, which is 4 in, hold for 4, out for 4, in for 4, hold for 4. That's never done much for me, but I think that helps them focus. And that's about it, people. I want to see if Inga is around. I'm going to end this now. For those of you who are watching, I hope you got something out of this. Send me your comments. Tell me what you think, because this is going to be on YouTube. Tell me what you do that makes a difference. Ask me any questions you want. And I want to thank you for joining me. I want to recommend that you consider subscribing. It makes a difference. Reading Aging Powerfully. I am hoping that we get this tribe of people behind the idea that we can age with power by doing the right thing. Eating well, staying away from the junk. I believe in whole food, plant-based. That's me for the last 5 years. Moving regularly. Exercise is vital. And now we understand how movement actually helps refocus the brain and direct our attention away from rumination and stress. Community, we must have people in our lives and around us. And sleep and again, stress management are part of the pillars of lifestyle medicine. Thank you for joining me.